There is this very specific, almost universal threshold that we all cross in endurance training.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, picture the scene. You are out on a long run, maybe it's a Sunday morning, the air is crisp, and you cross that first hour mark feeling totally invincible.
Right, the runner's high is in full effect.
Exactly. Your stride is fluid, your breathing is rhythmic. I mean, the first 60 minutes are just an absolute breeze. You are completely in the zone.
But then you hit minute 80.
Yeah, minute 80, maybe minute 90. You cross that invisible boundary into hour 2, and this, profound systemic shift happens.
It really does.
It is this grinding, bone-deep fatigue that doesn't just sit in your muscles. It seems to just seep into the marrow of your legs.
It's a heavy feeling.
So heavy. And your biomechanics start to slowly unravel. Your ground contact time increases by just a few milliseconds per step. Your shoulders start creeping up toward your ears. Your cadence drops.
Yeah, that effortless glide is just gone.
Right. Suddenly, running is no longer this automatic subconscious reflex. Every single footfall takes a conscious, focused, almost aggressive mental effort. I mean, we all know that exact heavy sensation, right?
We do. Honestly, it is the defining sensation of the sport.
For sure.
That is the precise moment when the physical act of forward motion becomes a psychological negotiation.
Oh, that's a great way to put it. A negotiation.
Right. You find yourself actively bargaining with your own central nervous system just to maintain a steady pace.
Just one more mile, just to that next tree.
Exactly. Yeah. The respiratory rate loses that easy rhythm and becomes ragged.
Mm-hmm.
The mechanical efficiency drops, and you are dealing with a very real, undeniable accumulation of physical and metabolic stress.
It's intense.
It is. Biologically speaking, it is a highly compromised, deeply uncomfortable state of being.
Yeah.
Just think about the sheer volume of waste products circulating in the blood, the microtrauma occurring in the muscle fibers, the rising core temperature your body is fighting on multiple fronts.
It's a miserable place to be. But here is the fascinating paradox at the heart of endurance culture.
Okay.
We absolutely worship that misery.
We really do.
We don't just tolerate it, we actively seek it out and put it on a pedestal. It forms the core folklore of training methodology.
It's like a badge of honor.
Totally. We are conditioned from day one to believe that the deep, dark suffering you experience in hour 2 is like the magic ingredient. The secret sauce.
The thing that actually makes you better.
Exactly. We inherently assume that a continuous, unbroken 2-hour slog through the pain cave builds a fundamentally different, vastly superior kind of fitness than if you were to, say, run an hour in the morning, feel totally fine, take a long break, and then run another hour in the evening.
Which I have to say is a completely rational assumption if you look at it through the lens of human psychology.
How so?
Well, we are deeply, perhaps evolutionarily, conditioned to equate the magnitude of our immediate suffering with the magnitude of our eventual reward.
Ah, right. No pain, no gain.
Exactly. If an experience extracts a massive toll in the present moment, we assume it is depositing an equally massive amount of physiological currency into our fitness account.
So the harder the immediate struggle, the greater the adaptation.
That's the assumption, yes.
I call it the false equation.
I like that.
Because as athletes, as coaches, as people who spend hours analyzing our training data, we naturally equate how much a workout hurts right now with how much fitness we are going to gain later.
It feels like basic math.
Right, because minute 90 feels so uniquely, distinctively miserable compared to minute 30, we assume it possesses some unique, irreplaceable biological value.
We really do.
We think, my heart is pounding harder, my legs are burning more, I am suffering exponentially more than I was an hour ago, therefore my body is receiving an exponentially stronger signal to build a bigger aerobic engine.
It feels undeniable.
It feels like basic, undeniable biological arithmetic.
It does feel intuitive. But that intuition is exactly what the source material we're examining today in this deep dive dismantles.
It completely takes it apart.
It really does. The central thesis of this deep dive, the paradigm shift that completely upends that folklore, is that the body's acute, in-the-moment response to exercise is not the same thing as the biological signal that dictates long-term adaptation.
Wait, okay, let's pause there. Those are two different things.
They are. Let me separate those two concepts for you. The immediate spike in your heart rate, the flood of stress hormones, the rising acidity in the muscle tissue that is the acute stress response.
Okay, the immediate fallout.
Yes, the immediate fallout of the work,
Mm.
but the signal that actually travels to the nucleus of your cells and tells your DNA to build more mitochondria for tomorrow.
The actual fitness upgrade.
Right, that is the chronic adaptation signal. And what the data clearly shows is that these two things, the immediate damage and the long-term upgrade, can operate entirely independent of one another.
Wow.
They can actually move in completely opposite directions.
So just because your cardiovascular system is screaming at you and your central nervous system is flashing red warning lights, that doesn't necessarily mean your body is currently busy writing the blueprints for a bigger, stronger engine.
Precisely.
So the volume of the alarm bell doesn't dictate the quality of the repair work.
That is the perfect way to frame it. The acute stress response and the chronic adaptation signal are decoupled.
Decoupled.
Yes. And they are decoupled in ways that completely contradict the traditional running folklore that demands continuous, unbroken suffering.
I mean, this has massive implications for anyone listening who is currently looking at their upcoming training schedule, dreading that unbroken 3-hour block on Sunday and wondering if there is another way.
There absolutely is another way.
Well, our mission today is to completely deconstruct that continuous long-run rule. We are going to build this from the ground up.
Let's do it.
First, we'll look at the immediate acute response to split versus continuous runs, like what is mechanically and metabolically happening to your body in the actual moment of the workout.
Which is fascinating on its own.
Totally. From there, because acute stress is only day one, we'll look at the long-term reality. We'll track the results over weeks and months to see if that suffering actually translates to a higher aerobic capacity at the finish line.
And we'll be comparing both completely untrained novices and highly trained veteran athletes.
Right. And then we have to go subcellular.
My favorite part.
Because performance metrics can sometimes mask the underlying mechanics, you know? So we are going to get microscopic. We will examine the literal DNA expression inside the muscle cells to see how the genetic transcription factors respond to split versus continuous volume.
And finally, because physiology always has a boundary condition, we are going to look at the breaking point.
The ultimate limit.
Exactly. We will explore the specific scenario where this entire rule shatters, and you actually do require continuous, unbroken suffering.
Which brings us into the extreme realm of ultramarathons.
It does.
Yeah.
And the specific workaround that coaches have designed to survive them.
It's a journey that really forces us to completely separate our emotional attachment to hard work from the objective reality of human physiology.
It's going to be a fun one.
So, to lay the foundation, we need to begin with the immediate physical toll, the sufferfest itself.
Because before we can analyze long-term fitness, we have to respect what athletes are actually feeling in the trenches during these different training distributions.
Let's dive into that acute response. We are looking at a very recent 2024 study published in Frontiers in Physiology by Talsnes and their research team out of Norway.
A fantastic paper.
And what immediately caught my eye about this source material is the caliber of the human beings they put on the treadmills.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, these are not your average recreational joggers looking to finish a local 5K.
Not even close. The subject pool consisted of 14 highly trained endurance athletes, specifically competitive runners and cross-country skiers.
Seriously fit individuals.
Very. To put their fitness into perspective, their average VO2 max was around 69.
Oh, wow. For the listener mapping that number, a 69 is elite territory.
It really is.
It represents a highly developed aerobic engine. These are athletes who train relentlessly, whose bodies are already incredibly optimized for oxygen delivery and utilization.
So we aren't looking at beginner gains here.
Right. We are observing highly tuned machines.
Exactly.
So the researchers brought these athletes into the lab on 2 separate days to test 2 different protocols. But the brilliant control here is that the mechanical output, the actual kinetic work being performed, was identical on both days.
The standardization was incredibly rigorous. The subjects ran at an intensity set to exactly 90% of the speed associated with their 4 millimole blood lactate threshold.
Okay, a 4 millimole blood lactate threshold. That is the classic OBLA, right? The onset of blood lactate accumulation.
That's the one.
So it is a very specific, moderate to hard aerobic effort. It's that physiological tightrope where your body is producing metabolic byproducts at a high rate, but your clearing mechanisms are just barely keeping pace to prevent catastrophic fatigue.
It's an uncomfortable, focused pace.
Yeah, it really demands concentration. The speed on the treadmill never fluctuated, and the total time spent running was identical on both testing days.
The only variable manipulated was the distribution of the work.
Okay, break that down for us.
Sure. On what they called the continuous day, The athletes ran 6 10-minute blocks back-to-back with only microscopic pauses for blood sampling.
So effectively, it was a 60-minute continuous effort right on the edge of that threshold pace.
Precisely.
Man, I can visualize that session perfectly. That is a solid, grinding hour of work. Now, how did they manipulate that for the split day?
On a split day, they took that exact same 60-minute volume and severed it right down the middle.
Okay.
The athletes ran 3 10-minute blocks in the morning. Then they stepped off the treadmill and were given a massive 6.5-hour break.
6.5 hours, that's huge.
It is. They left the lab, went about their normal day, ate, rested, and then returned in the afternoon to complete the final 3 10-minute blocks.
So same total time, same total distance, same speed.
Yes, just a massive wedge of recovery driven between the two halves of the workout.
Okay, let's look at the physiological data from the continuous day first. When they forced these elite athletes to grind through the full 60 minutes unbroken, what did the internal telemetry show?
It showed a textbook example of cardiovascular drift.
Cardiovascular drift.
Yes. Even though the speed of the treadmill remained absolutely static, the internal effort required to maintain that speed escalated significantly.
Right, because of the fatigue.
Exactly. The athletes started the session with their heart rates hovering around 168 beats per minute. But by the time they reached the end of the continuous hour, that heart rate had drifted up to 173 beats per minute.
Cardiovascular drift is such a revealing metric, because it shows the compounding cost of continuous work.
It really does.
For the listener, if you've ever kept your pace perfectly flat on a long run but noticed your heart rate slowly climbing into the red zone, you've experienced this.
It's a very common experience.
Yeah. Mechanistically, as you run continuously, your core body temperature rises. To keep you from overheating, your body vasodilates the blood vessels near your skin to dissipate heat. And you start sweating, which reduces your overall blood plasma volume.
And that triggers a cascade.
Right. With less blood volume and more blood shunted to the skin, the amount of blood returning to the heart with each beat, your stroke volume actually drops.
Yeah.
So to maintain the same cardiac output and keep delivering oxygen to your legs, the heart has no choice but to beat faster. It is the literal biological manifestation of compounding systemic fatigue.
That is the precise mechanism. The heart is working overtime just to maintain the status quo.
And I imagine the metabolic markers mirrored this.
They absolutely mirrored this stress. Their blood lactate levels, which we established as the primary proxy for metabolic strain in this study, rose from 2.6 millimoles early in the continuous run to over 3 millimoles by the final block.
Ouch.
Yeah. But perhaps the most telling metric is the rate of perceived exertion.
The mental side of it.
Right. On the standard Borg scale, the athlete's subjective feeling of effort climbed from a 13.4 up to a 14.8.
So their heart was working harder, their blood was acidic, and their brains were registering a significantly higher level of suffering.
The continuous run is doing exactly what we expect it to do.
Yeah.
It is wearing the athlete down systematically. It validates the sufferfest.
It does. But this brings us to the split protocol. The exact same mechanical work, but with that 6.5-hour gap.
Right.
When they came back to the lab in the afternoon to finish the second half of the work, what did their telemetry show? Did the fatigue from the morning carry over?
It didn't just fail to carry over. The physiological state actually inverted.
Inverted? What do you mean?
During the second half of the split protocol in the afternoon, their heart rates actually dropped compared to the morning session.
Right, really?
Yes. They went from an average of 171 beats per minute in the morning down to 166 beats per minute in the afternoon.
I have to pause on that because it is incredibly counterintuitive.
I know, it sounds crazy.
They had already run 30 minutes at threshold that morning, yet their heart rate was measurably lower during the second 30 minutes in the afternoon.
Lower heart rate and lower metabolic stress.
Yeah.
Their blood lactate levels dropped as well, going from 2.7 millimoles in the morning down to 2.1 millimoles in the afternoon.
That is wild.
The 6.5-hour break allowed the autonomic nervous system to completely reset.
So they just completely recovered.
Essentially, yes. The core temperature normalized, the blood plasma volume was restored through hydration, and the localized muscle environment cleared the metabolic waste.
Wow.
The afternoon run actually registered to the body as a lower stress event than the first half of the workout.
The gap essentially erased the compounding fatigue.
Completely erased it.
And I imagine that massive difference in acute stress manifested in their recovery the following day.
Profoundly.
Yeah.
The continuous session left a significantly larger systemic footprint.
Makes
The morning after the continuous run, the athletes presented with a higher resting heart rate, which is our classic indicator of residual sympathetic nervous system stress.
Right.
They also reported higher levels of subjective, overall fatigue, and significantly more localized muscle soreness compared to the morning after the split-day protocol.
Okay, looking at the tallness data in isolation, the picture is perfectly clear. The single continuous session is a massive acute stressor.
Without a doubt.
It drives up the heart rate, it spikes the lactate, it triggers delayed onset muscle soreness, and it leaves the central nervous system highly agitated the next day.
Yeah.
The split run, by contrast, is a physiological breeze.
Exactly.
But holding my ground as a skeptical endurance athlete, this is where the logic seems to trap us.
I see where you're going.
If I look at this data, my immediate thought is that the gentler stimulus must inherently be the weaker stimulus.
Right, the false equation.
Yeah. If the split day prevents cardiovascular drift, keeps lactate low, and prevents soreness, aren't I just shortchanging my fitness?
That's a fair question.
By taking the easy way out and inserting a massive rest period, I'm preventing my body from reaching that state of deep fatigue. Doesn't biological common sense dictate that a smaller disruption to homeostasis results in a smaller, weaker signal to adapt?
That logic is airtight if you only look at a 24-hour window.
Okay.
The assumption that greater immediate damage equals greater long-term architecture is the bedrock of endurance training philosophy. But acute stress markers, the soreness, the elevated resting heart rate, the high lactate, they only quantify the magnitude of the disruption.
They just tell you how much damage you did.
Exactly. They tell you how much of the house you just tore down. They offer zero insight into how effectively the body is going to rebuild it over the next recovery cycle.
Yeah.
To truly test your skepticism, to see if the suffering of the continuous run actually purchases extra fitness, we have to look past the day after soreness. We have to look at the long-term, multi-week reality of adaptation.
So we need to see if the athletes doing the continuous runs actually show up to the start line faster than the athletes doing the split runs.
Precisely. We move from the acute sufferfest to the long game. And the most logical place to start this observation is with a blank slate. The untrained beginner.
Okay, let's look at the beginners.
There is a foundational study from 2006 by Meyer and colleagues that tracked 38 untrained subjects over a comprehensive 12-week training block.
12 weeks is a massive intervention in sports science.
It really is.
That is a full 3-month macro cycle. You would absolutely expect to see profound, undeniable shifts in baseline aerobic capacity over that duration.
You certainly would.
How did they structure the training distribution for these 38 subjects?
They meticulously matched the total weekly training volume for all participants, but they divided the subjects into two distinct groups to test the distribution variable.
Got it.
Group A was assigned the Weekend Warrior protocol. They took their entire weekly allotment of training and crammed it into two large back-to-back continuous sections on Saturday and Sunday.
Yikes.
Right. Each of these continuous blocks was approximately 75 minutes long.
Okay, for an untrained individual, a 75-minute continuous endurance session is a monumental physiological event.
It's huge.
Their connective tissues aren't adapted to the impact, their metabolic pathways aren't efficient at fat oxidation, and their mitochondria are relatively sparse.
They are starting from zero.
Doing that on Saturday, waking up with massive systemic inflammation and soreness, and then forcing another 75-minute continuous block on Sunday is a brutal, concentrated dose of compounding stress.
It is a massive spike in acute overload. Now, Group B was given the exact same total weekly volume, minute for minute.
But distributed differently.
Yes. They were instructed to spread that volume evenly across 5 separate days during the week. They were performing much shorter, highly manageable, low-stress daily sessions.
So we have the ultimate A/B test of the continuous suffering hypothesis.
We do.
Group A is enduring huge, unbroken blocks of compounding stress that push them deep into cardiovascular drift and muscular fatigue. Group B is getting small, easily digestible doses of stress with constant recovery.
Exactly.
After 12 weeks of this, when they tested their aerobic capacity, what was the difference in their engine size?
There was absolutely zero meaningful difference in their aerobic capacity improvement.
Zero. No difference at all.
No.
The Weekend Warriors didn't gain a single extra aerobic benefit from all that continuous suffering.
Not a single measurable benefit. The massive single-day stress blocks experienced by Group A did not translate into superior fitness.
That is mind-blowing.
It is important to note they weren't worse off. They still adapted to the total volume, but the crucial takeaway is that the volume of work was the sole driver of adaptation.
The total time spent working.
Right. The distribution of that work and the acute suffering associated with continuous 75-minute blocks simply did not matter. Breaking the work into smaller, low-stress pieces yielded the exact same physiological upgrade.
That is a staggering blow to the no pain, no gain mentality.
It really challenged that whole culture.
I have to infer a massive caveat here.
I figured you might.
We are looking at a cohort of untrained beginners. When you take someone completely off the couch, their baseline fitness is so low that their biological ceiling for adaptation is incredibly high.
That's a fair point.
The novelty of the stimulus alone is enough to trigger growth. You could likely have them do jumping jacks for 15 minutes a day or jog once a week, and their VO2 max would skyrocket simply because the body is reacting to the sudden onset of physical demand.
True, their bodies are desperate for any stimulus.
Right, so the real test of this theory isn't the beginner, it's the veteran. What about the athlete who has been training for a decade?
The ones who are already optimized.
Yeah, their bodies are incredibly stubborn. They have already captured all the low-hanging fitness fruit, and their systems are highly resistant to further adaptation. Don't those highly trained athletes require the deep compounding stress of a continuous grueling session to force their stubborn physiology to keep adapting?
That is the exact physiological bottleneck that sports scientists aim to investigate. To see if the veteran requires that compounding stress, we look at a pivotal 2008 study by Yeo and colleagues.
Okay, let's hear it.
They specifically recruited a cohort of 7 highly trained cyclists and triathletes. These are individuals whose aerobic systems are already operating near their genetic potential.
So, really hard to improve.
Moving the needle on their performance is incredibly difficult.
So the stimulus has to be exceptionally potent.
Right.
How did they structure a training block that could force these veterans to adapt? And how did they test the split versus continuous variable?
They implemented a rigorous 3-week training block and divided the veterans into 2 groups. Group A followed a very traditional once-daily training schedule.
Okay, what did that look like?
One day, they would execute a 100-minute steady-state endurance ride. The following day, they would perform a high-intensity interval session. They simply alternated these single, dedicated daily sessions.
That is the bread and butter of endurance coaching. A long aerobic development day, followed by a sharp high-intensity day. Clean, focused stress with 24 hours of recovery in between.
Exactly. Now, Group B was placed on a radical split schedule. They trained twice every second day.
Oh boy.
They would execute that exact same 100-minute steady endurance ride, step off the bike, take a very brief 1 to 2 hour break, and then jump right back on the saddle to perform the brutal high-intensity interval sessions stacked onto the exact same day.
You're kidding.
Nope. Then they would take the following day completely off.
That protocol sounds like an absolute nightmare.
It's punishing.
If you do a 100-minute steady ride, your muscle glycogen stores are significantly depleted. Your central nervous system is fatigued. If you only take a 1 to 2 hour break, you don't even have time to digest a proper meal or replenish those glycogen stores.
You're running on empty.
Stacking a high-intensity interval session on top of that pre-fatigued, glycogen-depleted state means you are essentially doing the hardest, most demanding work on absolute fumes.
It's incredibly difficult work.
The accumulated fatigue in Group B must have been astronomical compared to the clean daily sessions of Group A.
The acute stress load for Group B was immense. It was the epitome of compounded suffering.
So what happened?
So, at the conclusion of the 3 weeks, the researchers didn't just look at heart rate or lactate. They measured actual athletic output.
Real-world performance.
Yes. Both groups performed a grueling 1-hour time trial to test how much speed and power they could sustain.
A 1-hour time trial is the ultimate truth serum for a cyclist. There is nowhere to hide. Did the immense stacked suffering of Group B buy them more power?
It did not.
Really?
Both groups improved their 1-hour time trial performance by a meaningful and remarkably identical margin.
The performance benefit was exactly the same.
Exactly the same. Whether you spread the workout into clean daily sessions with full recovery or stack it into a massive fatigue-laden mega session that pushes you to the brink of exhaustion, the performance upgrade was identical.
That is insane.
The profound, deep fatigue of the stacked session granted absolutely no magical physiological advantages.
That genuinely rewires how I think about training block design. The data shows it in untrained runners and highly trained cyclists. The suffering doesn't equate to the signal.
It really doesn't.
But I am still wrestling with a conceptual gap here.
Okay, what is it?
Well, performance tests, even something as rigorous as a 1-hour time trial, are ultimately macro-level observations. They are subject to the noise of human reality.
That's true. There are always variables.
Right, like pacing strategies, motivation on the day of the test, psychological tolerance for pain, slight variations in pre-test nutrition. All of these can mask tiny differences in underlying physiological fitness.
They absolutely can.
To truly believe that the split run and the continuous run are sending the exact same adaptive signal, I need to know what is happening microscopically.
You want to look under the hood.
Exactly. I want to look past the stopwatch and look directly into the cellular environment. How is it physically possible that the body is receiving the exact same adaptation blueprint if the acute in-the-moment stress environment is so drastically different?
To answer that, we have to bypass performance metrics entirely and go subcellular. We have to look at the literal DNA transcription happening inside the muscle tissue.
Now we're talking.
This brings us to a masterpiece of sports science, a 2007 study by Mortensen and colleagues. This study was explicitly designed to eliminate the blunt instrument problem of performance testing that you just described.
Looking at the methodology of the Mortensen study in our sources, I was blown away by the elegance of the design.
It's so clever.
In almost all sports science, when you compare Group A to Group B, you are fighting a losing battle against the noise of human existence. Person A might have a genetic predisposition for fast recovery. Person B might have slept terribly the night before the tests.
Right, or their diets are completely different.
Exactly. Person A might eat a nutrient-dense diet, while person B survives on processed food. You can never truly isolate the training variable because the humans themselves are too different. But Mortensen found a way to erase all of that noise.
They erased it by utilizing a single-leg training model. The participants served as their own perfect control group.
It is brilliant. They didn't compare one human to another. They compared a participant's left leg to their right leg.
Exactly.
Using a specialized cycling ergometer, they isolated the limbs. This means every single confounding variable was neutralized.
100%.
The systemic hormones circulating in the blood, the quality of the sleep, the macronutrient breakdown of their breakfast, their inherent genetic potential. It was all perfectly, flawlessly identical for both testing groups because both testing groups were housed inside the exact same human body.
It creates a perfectly sterile environment to test the training distribution variable.
So how did they set it up?
The protocol ran for 10 weeks. For every single participant, one leg was trained once, daily, every single day. The opposite leg was trained twice, every second day.
So we have our continuous daily distribution versus our split stack distribution. And to frame the duration for the listener, all of the sessions in this protocol were roughly 100 minutes or less in length.
Correct. Moderate endurance durations. After 10 weeks of this isolated training, the researchers didn't put them on a bike for a time trial.
No stopwatches this time.
Right. They performed localized muscle biopsies on the vastus lateralis of both legs. They extracted the actual muscle tissue to measure the genetic biomarkers of adaptation at the molecular level.
They bypassed the stopwatch and looked at the actual architectural blueprints. What specific biomarkers were they hunting for in that tissue?
They were specifically measuring the messenger RNA expression of the PGC1 family of genes, focusing on PGC1 alpha and PGC1 beta.
Okay, PGC1.
Yes. In the realm of exercise physiology, the PGC1 family acts as the master regulatory switch for endurance adaptation.
Let me propose an analogy here to avoid getting lost in the biochemistry.
Go for it.
Instead of thinking of these genes as just switches, imagine PGC1 alpha as the general contractor on a massive cellular construction site.
I like that.
When you exercise, the physical stress creates a blueprint of demands. PGC1 alpha is the contractor that reads that blueprint, realizes the cell is struggling to process oxygen, and starts aggressively ordering the construction of new infrastructure.
That's a very accurate way to visualize it.
It initiates mitochondrial biogenesis, building more furnaces in the cell to burn fuel, and it signals the shift of muscle fibers toward a more highly vascularized, fatigue-resistant profile.
That is an incredibly accurate analogy. PGC1 alpha doesn't just adapt the cell, it coordinates the entire systemic upgrade of the cellular infrastructure in response to metabolic stress.
So if there was any validity to the idea that continuous compounding suffering sends a stronger signal to the body, this is exactly where it would manifest.
Right here, the genetics.
If the continuous stress of the once daily leg created a more urgent blueprint, we should see a massive upregulation of PGC1 alpha and beta expression in that tissue compared to the split-trained leg. The contractor should be working overtime.
That's the hypothesis.
So what did the genetic analysis reveal?
The analysis revealed no significant difference between the two legs. The genetic expression was virtually identical.
The cellular blueprints were the same.
Exactly. Now, to be clear, the training was highly effective. Both legs underwent massive adaptations.
So the contractor was working just equally hard in both.
Yes, the muscle fibers shifted. And interestingly, the baseline expression of PGC1 beta actually decreased with training in both legs, which is a recognized autoregulatory mechanism as the muscle tissue becomes more metabolically efficient.
Okay.
But the paramount finding of the study is that the distribution of the volume delivering the stress continuously once a day versus splitting it into a twice-a-day format did not alter the cellular transcription.
The microscopic messengers in the muscle tissue are pulling the exact same genetic levers, ordering the exact same number of mitochondria, regardless of how the stress was distributed over the 48-hour window.
This data provides the definitive conclusion for moderate durations. When we are looking at training sessions in the 75 to 100-minute range, splitting the volume simply does not blunt the adaptive signal.
Wow.
Down to the literal mRNA transcription, you are not robbing yourself of any physiological benefit. Yes, the acute stress is significantly lower on a split schedule. You experience less cardiovascular drift, lower lactate, and less perceived misery. But the chronic adaptation signal operating behind the scenes is fully intact.
This is a massive paradigm shift that needs to be directly applied to real life.
Oh, absolutely.
For the vast majority of amateur athletes listening to this, time is the ultimate constraint. If you are looking at your training plan and it calls for a 90-minute endurance run on a packed Wednesday, and you simply cannot find a contiguous 90-minute block between your job and your family, the science is giving you a massive green light.
It is freeing, really.
Doing 45 minutes at dawn before the kids wake up and another 45 minutes on your lunch break or after dinner is not a failure. It is not a watered-down compromise. You are achieving the exact same molecular adaptation, the exact same mitochondrial biogenesis as the person who ground it out in one single session.
It is incredibly liberating. It removes the psychological guilt associated with the split session. It proves that flexibility in training distribution does not demand a sacrifice in physiological gains.
However, I am going to plant a massive flashing caution sign right here in the middle of this deep dive.
Uh-oh. Why is that?
Because human nature dictates that someone's going to listen to this, look at the Mortensen and Yeo data, and take it to its absolute illogical extreme.
Ah, yes. The extrapolators.
Right. Someone is going to hear that splitting volume is physiologically identical, and they're going to decide, fantastic, I am training for a marathon, so instead of a continuous 2-hour-long run, I'm just going to do 120 one-minute all-out sprints spread perfectly throughout my workday. It's the same volume, so I'll get the same marathon fitness.
And that is precisely where we must draw a hard, definitive line in the sand. Because the biological mechanisms absolutely do not support that extrapolation. Context is everything in sports science.
Everything.
We must respect the boundaries of the data we just examined. The Meyer study, the Yeo study, the Mortensen genetic analysis, every single one of these observed what physiologists classify as moderate durations. We are talking about interventions in the 75 to 100-minute range.
Right. They proved that splitting a 90-minute stimulus works. They did absolutely not prove that splitting a 6-hour stimulus works.
Which forces us to ask the ultimate boundary question. What is the breaking point of this biological rule? When does the concept of flexible distribution completely fall apart?
When do we actually need to suffer?
Exactly. What happens to the human organism when we aren't looking at an hour or two, but we are looking at 4, 8, or 20 hours of continuous, relentless forward motion?
We are entering the ultramarathon exception, the realm where the rules of standard physiology begin to warp.
We are. And to understand why the biological requirements change so drastically at these extreme distances, we have to look at a concept codified by Maunder and colleagues in a highly influential 2021 paper.
What did they look at?
They established a metric that goes beyond simple aerobic capacity. They defined the concept of durability.
Durability. It sounds more like an engineering term for a suspension bridge than a physiological metric. How do sports scientists actually quantify durability in a human?
They define durability as the time of onset and the magnitude of deterioration in physiological markers during prolonged exercise.
Okay, can you translate that for us?
Let me translate that into the reality of an athlete.
Yeah.
Traditional metrics like VO2 max or lactate threshold measure how fast you are or how much power you can produce when you are completely fresh.
Right.
Durability measures how much of that speed and power you can still produce in hour 6 when your muscle fibers are damaged, Your glycogen is severely depleted, and your central nervous system is deeply fatigued.
That's a completely different skill set.
It is. It is the measure of how long you can delay catastrophic mechanical and metabolic inefficiency.
So it's not about the size of the engine, it's about the resilience of the chassis and the fuel lines over extreme time frames.
Precisely. And the defining characteristic of durability is that it absolutely requires duration as the primary training stimulus.
So volume alone isn't enough.
No, total accumulated volume over a 7-day week is insufficient. You require sustained, continuous exposure to prolonged time under tension. Informed inferences from sports science indicate that there are 4 specific physiological adaptations required for ultra-endurance events that are fundamentally unsplittable.
Unsplittable.
Yes, you cannot hack them with twice-a-day workouts.
The 4 unsplittable adaptations. I want to unpack these thoroughly because this is where the sufferfest actually becomes mandatory. Let's look at the first one.
The first unsplittable adaptation is gut tolerance.
The dreaded runner's stomach, the absolute graveyard of so many ultramarathon dreams. Why does the gut require continuous time?
It comes down to a massive autonomic triage operation that occurs in your body when you exercise. The moment you start running, your sympathetic nervous system activates.
The fight or flight mode.
Yes, to meet the massive oxygen demands of your working muscles. And to dissipate the heat being generated, your body drastically redistributes its blood supply. It aggressively vasoconstricts the blood vessels in your splanchnic bed, your digestive system, and shunts that blood to your periphery.
So your stomach and intestines are essentially operating in a state of severe localized hypoxia. They are operating on a fraction of their normal blood flow.
Yes, it is a state of splanchnic ischemia. And yet, in an ultramarathon, because you are burning thousands of calories, you have to continually force carbohydrates, fluids, and electrolytes into that hypoxic, compromised gut for hours on end just to stave off collapse.
That sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It often is. The gastric emptying rate slows down, the risk of nausea spikes, and the sheer mechanical jostling of running compounds the trauma. The gut has to be specifically trained to absorb fuel under this sustained, multi-hour ischemic strain.
Which completely explains why splitting the run fails here. If you do a split routine, say you run for 2 hours in the morning, then you stop, go home, sit on the couch, and have a relaxed, nutrient-dense breakfast.
You're completely missing the point of the adaptation.
Right. The moment you stop running, your parasympathetic nervous system engages, the blood flow rushes back to your splanchnic bed, and you digest that meal in a state of perfect homeostasis.
Exactly.
When you run again in the afternoon, your gut is empty and happy. You completely bypass the specific stressor of digesting under prolonged duress. You never force the gut to learn how to operate in triage mode.
Exactly. You cannot train the gut to process a highly concentrated carbohydrate gel in hour 4 of the race if you never actually expose the gut to hour 4 in training.
That is a brilliant mechanical explanation. Okay, we have the ischemic gut as number 1. What is the second unsplittable adaptation?
Musculoskeletal durability.
The relentless physical pounding.
The compounding structural load. Running is essentially a series of thousands of single-leg plyometric bounds. Every single time your foot strikes the earth, especially on descending terrain, you introduce eccentric loading to the musculature.
That's where the damage happens.
Right. The muscle fibers are lengthening under tension, which creates microscopic tears in the sarcomeres. The tendons and ligaments absorb massive ground reaction forces.
And I imagine over an hour or 2, that's fine.
Over a 1 or 2 hour run, your body handles this efficiently. But as you cross into hour 3, 4, and 5, this repetitive impact loads the tissues progressively. The structural proteins begin to fatigue.
And things start to break down.
Exactly. And as the primary prime movers fatigue, your biomechanics shift. You start recruiting secondary, smaller stabilizer muscles to bear the load, which then stresses the connective tissues in entirely new, highly vulnerable ways.
Your form gets sloppy, your ground contact time increases, and the shock absorption moves from the muscles directly into the joints and tendons.
Exactly. And building physiological tolerance to that progressive compounding structural decay requires continuous time under sustained tension. The tissues must adapt to the specific reality of operating while damaged.
And again, a split run just ruins this.
A split session completely interrupts this process. If you run for 2 hours and stop, you give your tissues hours of recovery. The localized inflammation begins to subside, the fascia rehydrates, and your biomechanics completely reset.
So you're basically starting fresh.
When you run in the afternoon, you are started with a fresh structural chassis. You never expose the architecture of your legs to the true compounding trauma of a continuous 5-hour effort.
So the split runs will absolutely build the cardiovascular engine as we saw with Mortenson's genetic data, but they completely fail to harden the chassis for the realities of the ultra distance. You have a massive engine sitting in a fragile frame.
That's a perfect way to visualize it.
That is a crucial distinction. What is number 3 on the unsplittable list?
Fueling and the metabolic shift.
Oh, we are talking about the dreaded bonk hitting the wall.
Yes. The human body has a very hard biological limit on its storage capacity for glycogen, which is the premium, fast-burning carbohydrate fuel stored in the muscles and the liver.
It's a small fuel tank.
It is. Even if an athlete executes a perfect carbohydrate loading protocol in the days prior, those internal glycogen stores will generally only sustain about 90 to 120 minutes of moderate to hard endurance effort.
Which perfectly aligns with the physiological reality of the marathon wall. That is why so many runners catastrophically fall apart around mile 18 or 20. The premium fuel tank hits absolute zero.
Exactly. Once you burn through the available glycogen, your body is forced to undergo a massive enzymatic and metabolic shift. It must transition to relying predominantly on fat oxidation for ATP production.
Which is much slower, right?
Yes. Now, fat is an incredibly dense, massive energy reservoir. Even the leanest athlete has enough fat to run for days. But the metabolic pathway to brain fat beta oxidation is significantly slower and demands a much higher volume of oxygen to yield the same amount of cellular energy compared to carbohydrates.
Okay, so you have to train that system.
Training your metabolic machinery to efficiently oxidize fat, to upregulate the specific enzymes required for lipolysis, and to maintain a respectable forward pace while in a state of severe glycogen depletion is the absolute hallmark of ultra-endurance fitness.
And if you rely on split runs to build your ultra volume.
If you split your run, you fundamentally short-circuit this metabolic adaptation.
Because you refuel.
Yes. You run for 90 minutes, you deplete a portion of your glycogen, and then you stop. You go to the kitchen, you eat a carbohydrate-rich meal, and your body immediately secretes insulin to shuttle that glucose back into the muscle, restocking the premium tank.
Wow.
When you head over to the afternoon session, you are burning fresh glycogen all over again.
So you never actually flip the switch.
By refueling during the massive break in a split run, you completely bypass the need for the body to sustain prolonged fat oxidation. You never force the metabolic machinery into the corner where it has to learn to survive on fat alone.
You are artificially propping up the carbohydrate system, so the fat oxidation system never gets the signal to upgrade. The continuous run physically forces the depletion necessary for the adaptation.
Exactly.
Okay, we have the hypoxic gut, the structural decay, and the metabolic shift to fat. What is the fourth and final unsplittable adaptation?
Pacing and fatigue tolerance. And this brings us out of the muscles and directly into the realm of neuroscience. We have to look at a conceptual model known as the central governor hypothesis.
The central governor.
Now, I want to establish a very clear caveat here. The central governor model is debated in the highest circles of sports science. It is not universally accepted as an absolute flawless anatomical reality in every detail.
But it's a useful framework.
Exactly. As a framework for understanding human performance in extreme endurance scenarios, it is incredibly useful.
The core premise of the central governor is that the brain acts as a subconscious protective mechanism, correct? It's not just a passive passenger. It is actively regulating the output.
Yes. The theory suggests that your brain is constantly running a predictive algorithm. It is actively monitoring your systemic physiological state, your core temperature, your remaining glycogen levels, the oxygen saturation in your blood, the rate of muscle damage.
It's tracking everything.
Everything. And long before you actually reach a state of true catastrophic biological failure, long before your heart stops or your muscles undergo rigor, your brain starts sending out powerful fatigue signals to force you to slow down.
It makes you feel tired on purpose.
Yes. It actively creates the perception of severe effort to protect the organism from causing permanent, irreversible damage to itself.
It's the brain acting as a governor on an engine saying, the temperature is rising, the fuel is low, I am going to turn down the available power output before we destroy the block.
Exactly. And in an ultramarathon, you're essentially spending hours locked in a psychological negotiation with this central governor. You are dealing with deep, dark, multi-hour mental fatigue. The perceptual discomfort is overwhelming.
It's agonizing.
And tolerance to that specific kind of neurological fatigue, learning how to differentiate between the brain's protective alarm bells and actual physical failure, can only be built through repeated exposure to that state.
And again, a split run just won't do it.
A standard 2-hour run simply does not trigger the same deep-seated alarm bells in the brain as a 5-hour run. You cannot simulate the psychological and neurological reality of hour 5 without actually existing in hour 5.
Let's synthesize these 4 pillars because looking at them together reveals a fascinating common denominator: gut tolerance, musculoskeletal durability, the metabolic shift to fat oxidation, and neurological fatigue tolerance.
They're all linked.
They all share one defining characteristic. The stimulus for adaptation is the depleted, battered, exhausted state itself. The suffering isn't just a byproduct of the workout like it was in the shorter, moderate runs we discussed earlier.
No, it's central to it.
In the context of the ultra-distance, the suffering is the actual required mechanism of growth.
That is beautifully synthesized.
Yeah.
In the realm of ultramarathons, the physical and mental state of deterioration is the classroom. The decay is the curriculum.
That's so well said.
If you split the run and rely on fresh legs and full glycogen stores, you never even enter the classroom.
But this scientific reality instantly collides with a massive, glaring logistical nightmare for everyday people.
It does indeed.
We have just established biologically that if you want to run an ultramarathon, you absolutely need these continuous multi-hour physiological adaptations. But how on earth does someone with a normal life, a demanding job, a family, a mortgage, daily responsibilities, clear 5 or 6 continuous, unbroken hours for a single day of training on a regular basis?
It's incredibly difficult.
It's a luxury of time that is almost entirely impossible for the vast majority of amateur endurance athletes.
It is the primary barrier to entry for the sport. But this is exactly where practical, in-the-trenches coaching experience intersects with physiological science to find a solution.
There's a workaround.
Because ultra coaches have developed a highly effective biological workaround, a physiological loophole, if you will.
The back-to-back long run.
Precisely. The back-to-back long-run protocol.
Okay, tell us how this works.
Instead of attempting a same-day split where you run in the morning, rest for a few hours, and run in the afternoon, which we established allows for too much recovery, you distribute the stress across consecutive days with a very specific, calculated rest interval.
Okay.
For example, a coach might prescribe a 3-hour run late on Saturday afternoon and then have the athlete wake up and execute a 2-hour run early on Sunday morning.
Okay, looking at the data we just covered, I have to ask the obvious question that springs to mind here.
Go ahead.
We just spent 20 minutes dissecting why a 6.5-hour gap in the Talsness study allowed the body to completely reset and ruined the compounding stress. Why does an overnight gap work when a daytime gap fails?
It's a very logical question.
I mean, an overnight gap includes dinner, hydration, and crucially, 8 hours of sleep. Shouldn't a full night of sleep be the ultimate biological reset button? Why doesn't sleeping interrupt the unsplittable adaptations?
It is the most critical question of the protocol. And the answer lies in the sheer magnitude of depletion from that first massive 3-hour session, combined with the hard enzymatic limits of human digestion and recovery.
Enzymatic limits.
Yes. An overnight gap, even assuming a perfect night of sleep and a massive carbohydrate-dense dinner, is simply not a long enough window of time to fully restock the muscle glycogen stores.
Oh, because it takes time to process.
Exactly. The enzyme responsible for this, glycogen synthase, have a rate limit. Even if you consume a mountain pasta, your muscles can only process and store that glucose so quickly. It generally takes 24 to 48 hours to completely refill a deeply depleted glycogen tank, especially when the muscle tissue is actively damaged, which blunts insulin sensitivity.
The tank is physically incapable of refilling in 12 hours, so when the alarm goes off on Sunday morning...
When you lace up your shoes on Sunday morning, your premium fuel tank is still half empty. Furthermore, your central nervous system has not fully cleared the sympathetic stress of the previous evening, and the localized muscular inflammation and microtrauma have actually peaked due to the delay in onset muscle soreness.
So you are starting the Sunday morning run in a deliberately compromised, pre-fatigued, glycogen-depleted state.
Exactly. Because you are starting compromised, the adaptations happen immediately.
You don't have to wait 2 hours for the fatigue to set in.
Right. Within 20 minutes of running on Sunday, your splanchnic blood flow is restricted and your gut is stressed. Your structural stabilizers are fatigued, forcing your connective tissues to absorb the load. Your body, lacking glycogen, is immediately forced to upregulate fat oxidation. And your central governor is screaming at you because the perceptual effort is disproportionately high.
So you managed to trigger all four of the unsplittable ultra adaptations without ever needing to find a single unbroken 5-hour block of time on your calendar.
That is an incredible biological workaround.
It really is. It's essentially hacking your own physiology, utilizing incomplete recovery to trick your internal systems into believing they have been running all day. It bridges the gap between the cellular science and the reality of a busy life.
That's very smart programming.
Okay, let's step back and bring all this evidence from the microscopic mRNA transcription in Mortenson's genetic study to the immense compounding fatigue of the ultramarathon chassis directly to the listener who is trying to design their own training plan.
Just do it.
Let's synthesize the actionable takeaways.
The overriding principle is that the specific physiological context of your goal dictates the rules of your training distribution.
Context is everything.
If your target is general fitness, or you are training for a 10K, or even a highly competitive half marathon.
Events where your primary physiological objectives are building the VO2 max engine, pushing up your lactate threshold, and increasing your cardiovascular efficiency to shave minutes off your race time.
Yes, the engine-building events. For those athletes, the research spanning Meyer's untrained subjects, Yeo's veteran cyclists, and Mortenson's cellular biopsies provides absolute clarity.
And what's the verdict for them?
Splitting a 75 to 100-minute session into two shorter sessions, like 45 minutes in the morning and 45 in the evening, is a perfectly legitimate, highly effective option. It is not a compromise.
That is huge.
It does not weaken the adaptive signal. You will trigger the exact same mitochondrial biogenesis and the exact same aerobic engine upgrades as if you suffered through it continuously.
So you don't have to suffer.
If your daily schedule, your family life, or your injury history demands a split routine, you can embrace it with total confidence and zero guilt.
But if you look at your calendar and you have circled an ultramarathon, an Ironman, or any endurance event extending past that critical 3 to 4 hour boundary,
then the biological rules completely change. For ultra-endurance, the deeply fatigued, glycogen-depleted, structurally compromised state of an unbroken run is the necessary training stimulus.
you can't fake it.
You are training durability, not just capacity. You cannot substitute that structural and metabolic stress with split, fully rested formats.
Yeah.
You must expose the system to prolonged time.
And if you can't.
And if a single massive block of time is logistically impossible for your schedule, you must utilize the back-to-back consecutive day loophole to artificially force that necessary physiological depletion.
It all comes down to knowing exactly which biological lever you are actually trying to pull on any given day of your training block. You have to align the specific type of stress with the specific adaptation you require.
Precisely. The training must match the biological demand of the event.
This has been a genuinely enlightening, paradigm-shifting deep dive into the source material. It completely changes how we view the necessity of suffering.
I'm glad we could break it all down.
But before we wrap up, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final, somewhat provocative thought to mull over on your next run. Something that builds on the science we unpacked today, but pushes the boundary of what we currently understand just a little further.
Oh, I like where this is going.
If we fully accept what Mortenson's genetic single-leg study proved, that the deep, grueling, grinding physical suffering in hour 2 of a 90-minute run isn't actually building any extra supple fitness, new mitochondria, or structural capacity compared to a much easier split session, it begs a massive existential question about the rest of our endurance training.
It really does.
How much of our daily, moderate duration training is purely a psychological exercise? When we deliberately force ourselves through those miserable, continuous blocks on a Wednesday afternoon, knowing the physical adaptations are identical to a split run, are we just inflicting mental stress on ourselves for absolutely no physiological reason?
That's a fair point.
Or is there a hidden psychological adaptation to suffering, a neurological callus being formed in the brain that science simply hasn't figured out how to quantify under a microscope yet? Are we training the mind to tolerate the intolerable?
That's the million-dollar question.
The next time you find yourself grinding through minute 85, bargaining with your own fatigue, ask yourself, is this for my legs or is this for my mind?
That is a brilliant, open-ended question to ponder out on the road. The intersection of measurable data and the unquantifiable human experience is where the true art of endurance coaching lives.
Absolutely.
And this deep dive was brought to you with training insights from FitPA, an AI coach that turns your training data into real decisions. FitPA syncs your workouts, sleep, HRV, and recovery data automatically, then helps you set concrete goals and build adaptive training plans around them. Plans that adjust as your fitness, fatigue, and life get in the way. Beyond planning, the integrated coach gives you real-time insights on pacing, recovery, readiness, and workout strategy, all grounded in your actual data.